What if I told you that the night you dress up as a superhero and beg strangers for candy was once a terrifying ritual where people believed the dead walked among them? That carving pumpkins wasn't about cute faces, but keeping malevolent spirits from entering your home? Halloween didn't start with costume parties and chocolate bars. It began over 2,000 years ago in the cold, dark forests of ancient Ireland, where a festival called Samhain marked the one night when the boundary between our world and the realm of the dead completely dissolved. The Celts weren't celebrating, they were surviving. And the traditions you think are harmless fun? They're rooted in genuine terror, psychological manipulation, and a desperate human need to control what we cannot understand. This isn't the Halloween story you learned in school. This is where your favorite holiday really came from, and trust me, the truth is far more unsettling than any horror movie. Before we go further, if you're fascinated by the hidden darkness behind everyday things, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment with the next topic you want me to uncover. Your suggestions actually shape this channel. Let's go back to ancient Ireland, around 2,000 years ago. The Celtic people who lived there weren't just superstitious farmers making up stories around campfires. They were observing something very real. As October ended and November began, everything around them was dying. Crops withered, animals grew scarce, daylight shrank dramatically, and without modern science to explain seasonal changes, their minds did what human minds always do when faced with existential dread. They created narratives to make sense of the terror. The Celts called this transitional period Samhain, pronounced Samhain. It marked the end of harvest season and the beginning of winter, which back then was essentially a death sentence for many. Without adequate food storage, heating, or medical care, winter killed people. Lots of people. So when the Celts observed nature dying around them, they weren't being poetic. They were watching a preview of their own potential fate. But here's where it gets psychologically fascinating. The Celts believed that on the night of October 31st, the barrier between the living world and the world of the dead became so thin it essentially vanished. The dead could return, not as friendly ghosts wanting to say hello, but as potentially dangerous entities who might harm the living, destroy crops, or possess people. This wasn't entertainment. This was their reality. From a psychological perspective, this belief system served a crucial function. When you're facing a brutal winter that might kill your family, having a ritual that gives you the illusion of control over death itself is incredibly powerful. The Celts couldn't control the weather or prevent starvation, but they could perform rituals to manage the supernatural threats they believed accompanied the season. This gave them agency in a world where they had almost none. So they built massive sacred bonfires, often on hilltops, where they'd gather as communities. These weren't cozy campfires. These were enormous blazes that could be seen for miles, serving both practical and psychological purposes. The light pushed back the darkness, yes, but more importantly, it created a shared space where the community could face their collective fear together. The fire rituals of Samhain reveal something unsettling about human psychology. We're willing to destroy what we value when we're terrified enough. The Celts would bring their cattle and other livestock to these sacred fires and sacrifice some of them, burning the animals as offerings to Celtic deities. Think about that. These were people who depended entirely on their animals for survival, yet they'd kill and burn them because the psychological need to appease potentially hostile supernatural forces outweighed immediate practical concerns. This is dark psychology at its finest. The ritual created a pattern of sacrifice and appeasement that gave participants a sense of having done something to protect themselves. Whether or not supernatural entities existed didn't matter. What mattered was the psychological relief that came from believing you'd taken action against an existential threat. This same mechanism drives human behavior today in countless ways, from good luck charms to elaborate security theater. But the fires weren't just for animal sacrifice. The Celts believed that these flames had protective and cleansing properties. After the communal fire burned down, families would take flames from it back to their own homes to relight their hearths. This wasn't just practical fire management. It was a symbolic act of bringing sacred protection into their domestic spaces. The fire from the communal ritual was thought to carry special power that would protect the household through the dangerous winter months. Now let's talk about the costumes, because yes, the Celts wore them, but not for the reasons you'd think. People would disguise themselves in animal skins and heads not to look cute or scary for fun, but because they genuinely believed that if the dead and other supernatural entities were walking among them, blending in might save their lives. If you looked like a spirit, maybe the actual spirits would leave you alone. Others theorized that the disguises were meant to confuse evil spirits who might want to cause harm. Can't curse someone if you don't know who they are, right? This reveals another psychological truth. Humans will fundamentally alter their identity when survival is at stake. The Celts were willing to temporarily become something other than themselves because the alternative, being recognized and targeted by hostile supernatural forces, was too terrifying to risk. The Samhain rituals included another element that's especially relevant to understanding Halloween today: offerings of food and drink. The Celts would leave portions of their meals outside their homes or at the edges of their property. Why? They believed that the spirits of their dead ancestors would return on this night and need sustenance for their journey. But here's the twist. Not all spirits were friendly family members. Some might be malevolent entities just looking for trouble. So the food offerings served a dual purpose. For friendly ancestor spirits, it was hospitality and remembrance. For potentially harmful entities, it was appeasement. Here's some food, please don't destroy my crops or possess my children. This is literally the psychological origin of trick-or-treat. Give something to the threatening presence at your door, or face consequences. The Celts also practiced divination during Samhain, believing that the thinning of the veil between worlds made it easier to see the future, particularly regarding death and marriage. Young people would perform rituals to glimpse their future spouses, while others would try to predict who in the community might not survive the coming winter. These weren't party games. These were desperate attempts to gain knowledge that might help them prepare for loss and suffering. What we're seeing in these ancient practices is humans trying to negotiate with death itself. They couldn't stop winter from coming. They couldn't prevent diseases that had no cure. They couldn't control whether there'd be enough food to last until spring. But they could create elaborate rituals that gave them the psychological sensation of control, of having done everything possible to protect themselves and their loved ones. The terror that drove Samhain wasn't abstract or symbolic. It was immediate and material. People died every winter. Spirits of the dead returning wasn't a fun, spooky story. It was a genuine belief that shaped behavior and community practice. The darkness wasn't metaphorical. It was literal, lasting 16 hours or more each day, and with it came cold, hunger, and death. Samhain was the night when the Celts confronted all of that at once, and the rituals were their way of saying, "We see you, death, and we're not going quietly." Fast forward several centuries, and Christianity is spreading across Europe like wildfire. The Roman Catholic Church faces a problem. These pagan festivals like Samhain are deeply embedded in local cultures, and people aren't exactly eager to abandon traditions that have helped them psychologically cope with death and darkness for generations. So the Church does something brilliantly manipulative. Instead of trying to eliminate these festivals, they absorb them. In the 8th century, Pope Gregory III designated November 1st as All Saints' Day, a time to honor all Christian saints and martyrs. Conveniently, this placed a Christian holy day right on top of Samhain. The night before became All Hallows' Eve, which eventually morphed into Halloween. This wasn't coincidence. This was strategic cultural appropriation designed to ease pagan populations into Christian practice by letting them keep their festivals, just with a new religious framework. But here's what's fascinating from a psychological perspective. The Church couldn't completely sanitize the darker elements. The folk beliefs about spirits, the dead returning, and supernatural dangers didn't just disappear because a pope said so. Instead, they merged with Christian concepts of souls in purgatory, creating a hybrid belief system that satisfied both the Church's need for control and people's deep-seated need to maintain their protective rituals. By the Middle Ages, the practice of souling emerged across Britain and Ireland. Poor people, including children, would go door to door on All Hallows' Eve offering to pray for the dead in exchange for soul cakes, small pastries often marked with a cross. Families believed that these prayers could help their deceased relatives' souls, pass through purgatory more quickly, so they'd give food to strangers who promised to pray for people they'd never met. Does this sound familiar? It should. This is a direct ancestor of trick-or-treating, but instead of trick-or-treat, it was prayers for cakes. The psychological mechanism at work here is fascinating. The living were essentially paying for spiritual services to benefit the dead, creating an economy based entirely on fear of the afterlife and hope for salvation. The church had successfully channeled the ancient fear of death into a system that reinforced Christian doctrine while maintaining the door-to-door exchange that had roots in pagan offerings. Meanwhile, in Scotland and Ireland, a practice called guising was developing. Young people would dress in costumes and go from house to house, but here's the key difference from modern trick-or-treating. They had to perform something to earn their treats. A song, a poem, a joke, a trick. Some kind of entertainment was expected in exchange for food or coins. This wasn't begging. It was a formalized social exchange where the disguised visitors provided value before receiving their reward. The costumes themselves evolved too. While they still included elements of disguise meant to confuse spirits, they increasingly became theatrical. People dressed as the dead, as demons, as supernatural creatures, essentially performing the very things their ancestors had feared. This is a perfect example of humans transforming trauma into entertainment. What once terrified us becomes something we play act, giving us a sense of mastery over our fears. Kids dressing as ghosts aren't scared of ghosts. They've become the ghosts, claiming power over what once held power over their ancestors. But let's talk about why these traditions persisted for so long. They served crucial social functions beyond superstition. In pre-modern communities, these annual door-to-door visits reinforced social bonds and community obligations. The wealthy were expected to share with the poor. Neighbors were reminded of their interconnectedness. The disguises temporarily erased social hierarchies. You couldn't refuse someone at your door if you didn't know whether they were a peasant or your landlord's child. This created a brief window where normal social rules were suspended and redistribution of resources happened outside the usual power structures. From a dark psychology perspective, there was also an implied threat. The word trick-or-treat might sound cheerful now, but the original concept had teeth. If you didn't provide treats, you might face tricks, pranks, vandalism, or social consequences. This wasn't entirely playful. It was a culturally sanctioned form of minor extortion that allowed the have-nots to demand something from the haves, backed by the supernatural authority of the season. You weren't just refusing a child a candy. You were violating a sacred tradition, and the community would know. Now let's jump to America, because this is where Halloween transforms from a folk tradition into a commercial juggernaut. Irish and Scottish immigrants brought their Halloween customs to North America in the 19th century, but the holiday didn't immediately catch on. It was regional, mostly celebrated in immigrant communities and often associated with rowdy behavior and vandalism. By the early 20th century, Halloween had a serious public relations problem. It was increasingly linked with destructive pranks, property damage, and general mayhem. So community leaders, parents, and eventually corporations decided to domesticate Halloween. They did this by focusing on children and shifting the emphasis from mischief to wholesome, organized fun. Civic organizations started promoting safe, supervised Halloween activities like parties and parades. The trick part of trick-or-treat was deliberately de-emphasized in favor of the treat part. This wasn't just about safety. It was about social control, channeling chaotic folk tradition into a manageable, profitable event. And then candy companies saw their opportunity. In the 1950s, after sugar rationing from World War II ended, candy manufacturers aggressively marketed their products as the ideal Halloween treat. Small, individually wrapped candies were perfect for mass distribution. They were cheap, easy to hand out, and unlike homemade treats, they came sealed from a trusted manufacturer. The industry spent decades normalizing the idea that Halloween equals candy, and they succeeded spectacularly. This is where we see the complete transformation of Halloween's psychological function. What started as a festival to cope with death and winter's terror became a celebration of consumerism disguised as tradition. The fear of malevolent spirits was replaced by the manufactured fear of not having enough candy, not having the right costume, not decorating your house enough. Corporations identified the deep psychological needs that Halloween originally served: community belonging, facing fears, seasonal ritual, and figured out how to monetize all of them. Today, Americans spend over $10 billion on Halloween annually. We buy costumes manufactured overseas, candy from multinational corporations, and decorations made from petroleum-based plastics. We've transformed a festival born from genuine terror into an aesthetic. We consume the imagery of death, skeletons, ghosts, gore, completely detached from any real confrontation with mortality. We've made fear safe, death cute, and darkness something you can buy at a store and return if you don't like it. So here's what we've uncovered. Halloween didn't start as fun, it started as survival. The Celts created Samhain because they needed psychological tools to face the very real threat of death that came with winter. They built fires, made sacrifices, wore disguises, and left offerings because these rituals gave them a sense of control in a world where they had almost none. That's not superstition. That's humans doing what we've always done, creating meaning and structure in the face of chaos. Then Christianity came along and did what powerful institutions always do. They co-opted existing traditions, rebranded them, and used them to reinforce their own power structures. All Saints' Day didn't erase Samhain, it absorbed it. The folk practices continued, but now with a Christian veneer. Souling and guising kept the door-to-door exchanges alive, maintaining the social functions these rituals served, redistributing resources, reinforcing community bonds, and giving the powerless a moment of leverage. When these traditions reached America, they underwent their final transformation. Halloween became safe, commercialized, and completely disconnected from the existential dread that created it. We still carve pumpkins, but we've forgotten we're symbolically warding off evil. We still wear costumes, but we don't believe we're hiding from the dead. We still give treats to strangers at our doors, but there's no real threat if we refuse. The rituals remain, but the meaning has been hollowed out and filled with plastic, sugar, and profit margins. And maybe that's not entirely bad. Maybe it's healthier to play act our fears rather than live in genuine terror of winter and death. But it's worth knowing what we've lost in the translation. Halloween was once a night when humans confronted their mortality, their powerlessness, and their deep need for community in the face of darkness. Now it's a night when we buy costumes on Amazon and argue about whether full-size candy bars are worth the expense. The ancient Celts would probably find our version of Halloween bizarre. All the imagery of death with none of the weight of it, all the ritual with none of the belief. But they might also understand that we are doing what humans have always done, taking the darkness and making it ours, even if we've forgotten why we started doing it in the first place. So next time you carve a pumpkin or hand out candy, remember you're participating in something much older and stranger than you thought. You're part of an unbroken line of humans trying to make sense of death, darkness, and the changing seasons. We've just gotten really good at pretending it's all just for fun. If this made you see Halloween differently, or if you're now looking at your plastic skeleton decorations with a bit more respect, hit that subscribe button. Drop a comment below with what historical topic you want me to ruin for you next. Seriously, your suggestions drive this channel, and I want to know what darkness you're curious about. And hey, whether you're team elaborate decorations or team turn off the lights and pretend you're not home, have a good Halloween. Just remember, somewhere deep in the history of that candy bar you're eating is a terrified ancient Celt trying to keep spirits from destroying their crops. Funny how things change. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.